All right, we will go ahead and get this show going. Once again, thank you all for joining this product demo for our Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 Technical Deep Dive. We'll be going through over some of our basics for our Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365, touching on some deployment, some newer features, and things of that nature. If at any point you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat or in the question area, and I will get to them at the end where we can discuss kind of a Q&A session. So to go ahead and get us started, this webinar is being recorded. I will be shown on our partner page. Just to let you all know, you are automatically muted on entry. And once again, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A or chat functions and we will get to them at the end. And once again, we will be posting the recording and presentation on the Veeam Pro Partner portal. So let's get to the overall product overview for our Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. Why are we backing up our data for 365? Well, a couple of reasons. We want to eliminate the risk of losing access to your Microsoft 365 data. And of course, this is going to include Microsoft Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and Microsoft Teams as well. This will ensure that you remain in complete control and that your data is always protected and accessible, especially in the time of ransomware attacks. We do, obviously want to make sure we have access to our data, but we want to make sure it's nice and secure. So some of the key capabilities that deliver our Microsoft 365 data protection is we're going to offer that backup control. We can protect your Microsoft 365 data from any accidental deletion and security threats. You can back up weekly, daily, or even 5 minutes in Microsoft formats. So a lot of flexibility when it comes to those backup controls. And also, we are storage agnostic here at Veeam. You can store anywhere, whether that be on premises or in the cloud or utilizing any object storage. This is, of course, going to include AWS S3, Azure Blob, or any of those on-prem S3 compatible devices as well. Also, for the recovery, you're going to see some great options for flexibility. We have over 50 ways, including granular and bulk recovery. You can recover that data back to a new original location. You also have various save, send, and export options, as well as self-service restore options. If you would like to give the end users that capability to go in and restore from their own environment, you do have that option. And last, we also have our powerful e-discovery. So you can meet your compliance needs with our efficient and customizable e-discovery for 365 items. And you can leverage those advanced searches to locate the specific data sets that you need to recover to ensure that you can recover your data timely. So for today, we will cover a bit of the installation and deployment. This will include some of that first time setup. We will also go through the navigation and learning of the UI. We will go ahead and touch on configuring an initial backup job and an example of recovery. And we will also touch on credentials and password management as well. Just going to go over some nice architecture before we get into the product itself. Just going to touch on, what we protect. As we touched on, we are going to protect that Exchange Online, our SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, as well as Microsoft Teams. In combination with that, we do that in the cloud, as well as those on-prem Exchange and SharePoint, and that can be all backed up from our single deployment for Microsoft 365. So no need for multiple deployments there. And then once we have our data that we want to protect, we can select where we want to store it. Again, we touched on some of those storage repository options. Those are going to include those object storage compatibilities, so those Amazon S3, those S3 compatibles, Wasabi storage. We're also going to have Microsoft Azure Blob and IBM Cloud as those object storage options. You also have the potential to utilize on-prem for that local storage or on-prem for object storage, again, those S3 compatible devices. More recently, we have an option to do an immutable backup copy job. And immutability is going to be any data sets that cannot be edited, altered, or deleted, kind of referring more to that worm, white runts, read many kind of formatting. We have that. We can use that in the Microsoft Azure Blob for those backup copies that are immutable. our Amazon S3 or Glacier buckets, and again, those S3 on-prem compatible devices. And for our recovery option, we'll be able to see what our recovery feature looks like in our demo a little bit later, but you're going to have different Explore features for both the Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams. And again, those options to restore, send, save, export, or have the end users themselves restore their own environment with the self-service restore. And if you do opt in to utilize our Veeam One, you will have the option to monitor your overall environments. This, of course, would include your Veeam backup and replication environment if you had that as well. But you are able to have a at-a-glance dashboard, and this will kind of give you an overall understanding of both your Microsoft 365 backup for Veeam environment, as well as those repositories that you're utilizing in your environment to kind of see where you stand with that recovery, the backups themselves, and even storage location. So I will go ahead and jump over to our demo itself here. And I will pull that up momentarily. Before we begin our demo, we will go on to how to download the Microsoft 365 itself. So whenever we are trying to download and deploy Microsoft 365, you can, of course, come through the Veeam website itself. You can also go through your partners. Through there, you will have the option to either download that trial. You're also going to have some purchasing options as well down below. Once we have downloaded our Veeam Backup for 365 environment, we can then go to installing our environment, and I will go ahead and show you what that will look like. Once we do download that Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365, we will have the option to install a couple different features here. And I will show you all what that will look like. So for this environment, we can see here we do have a couple different options. We're going to have that Veeam Backup for 365 for the application itself. We are also going to have these installs for those Veeam Explorers for Exchange and SharePoint as well. One last thing to note here is you will have your licensing key down here below that I will also walk you all through setting up momentarily. And I will go ahead and get our Microsoft 365 environment open so we can go through what that will look like for both the initial setup and adding those licensing keys. So we have here, this is going to be our Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 environment. This is, of course, after we have downloaded those various downloads that we need to do for the 365 environment itself and the Exchange as well. Once we have downloaded those, we can, of course, go into our application itself for Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365. One of the first things we're going to want to note here is we will want to add that licensing I pointed out in the last screen. I do have a current licensing in this current environment, but you would simply go to the install and go into that installation package folder. Once you have gone into that installation package folder, you will select that licensing and you will be able to update it in this environment. As you can see, once you have added the licensing, you will have the option to update the licensing automatically, and you will have also just the option to come in here and manually select Update Now. The second thing we're going to want to look at once we have kind of started our Microsoft Backup for 365 environment is we are going to want to add our Microsoft organizations. So from adding our Microsoft organizations, we can come down here to select the services that we'd like to protect within our environments. One thing to note here is you will see Teams chat is unselected. We are able to do more of those team grouping chats. for backups, but there is a different process for adding that. And there are some different costs on the Microsoft 365 and for utilizing those API keys. So something to note there if that is something that you are interested in backing up in your environment. Once we have selected the applications within our 365 environment that we would like to back up, we're going to have our authentication methods. We are going to have an option for that modern authentication, which you can use any authentication software to utilize. And you're also going to have the option to do that basic authentication. Of course, for security, we are going to recommend that modern authentication in general. Once we have selected our authentication types, and obviously I am logged into our current environment, we are going to want to register a new Azure AD application. We're going to want to do that as this is going to be our initial backup for Veeam for 365. You can, of course, use an existing Azure AD application if you already had a pre-configured Azure AD application. But once again, since we are doing a new Veeam backup for Microsoft 365, we're going to want to register that automatically. And Veeam makes that nice and easy. So all you have to do to register the Azure AD application is simply come to this screen. You can name your certificate. We can come in here and we have a couple different options. We can generate a new self-signed certificate. For those first-time users, we will definitely be selecting those options, but you do have the option to select a certificate from a certificate store of the server or import a certificate from a PFX file if you so chose. Once we are there, it of course is going to give us a friendly name to utilize for our certificate itself. And then simply we will go through with the registering the Azure AD application, and we will be logging into our 365 environment. This is made very easy as we can simply click on the link that is provided within this window here. And we will simply go to Microsoft itself, where we can then enter our code to connect to our Microsoft 365 environment. From there, we will be connected to our 365 environment, and we can begin to look at our backup infrastructure and then work towards setting up our initial backup job. Once we have connected the organization to our environment, one of the first things that we are going to want to look at is our backup proxies themselves. Are you all able to see my screen? I see that there was a question that you were unable to see my screen. Just wanted to make sure before proceeding. And thank you for the user that mentioned that. I will continue. Feel free. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that interaction. And once again, we are here in our backup infrastructure. So just to recap, we do have our Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 deployed. We have installed the basic installation for the product itself, along with those Explore features that we will touch on. We have then added our licensing that will be included with our download file. From there, we have added our Microsoft organizations that we are looking to back up. Now, once we have done all those steps, we will again come look at our backup infrastructure, and we'll be able to come down and look up our backup proxies. Now, when you do download the Microsoft for 365 initialization package for the environment, it is going to come with kind of the configuration for the proxies. We simply have to go in and specify our host and our port. As you can see here, for this example, we have used our domain network, which you can simply click. And then we've allocated, of course, at that host and that port. Once we have specified the host and port we would like to utilize, we will then be choosing our credential login selection. I am doing the multi-authentication method here, and I have a current login that is selected. If you did want to do your basic authentication, you have the option to sign in down here below. And for those who weren't here for that breakdown, we are going to want to use that modern authentication for just overall best security practices. Once we have selected and logged into our environment itself, we can see here that we are kind of enabling that proxy, setting it up, and we're going to get a nice little summary screen here to finish it up. Once we have created our proxy and kind of set our host and port numbers for that, and Veeam has set up the rest of our proxy for that data moving that will occur with the proxy, we can look at our backup repositories. Now for our backup repositories that we kind of covered here in the beginning, we're going to have a couple different options. We're going to have the option to either back up to object storage, like we discussed, whether that's going to be that Azure Blob or Amazon S3 bucket, or even those on-prem S3 devices. Those are going to be your object storage. We're also going to have that option to back up to a local disk, which we do have here. For this example, I'll just go through with our object storage. Once we have selected our object storage, we'll be selecting that proxy that we potentially just set up. You do have the option to add multiple proxies, especially for performancing and load balancing. If you wanted to set up more proxies for a larger environment, you do have that option. But for this example, I'm just going to be selecting the proxy that we already set up. And as you can see, it is going to be my original and default proxy. So once we're here, we can just kind of go in and select an environment for our local cache path. So this is going to be where our read writes for those recovery data are. It's going to be that temporary store for those read writes. So it won't take up a lot of storage within your environment. It's just a good way to have it allocated. So whenever we do recover our environment, we'll have that cache already set up. From here, one of the main things to look at is going to be what type of retention policy we would like. So in our Veeam Backup for 365, this is set up on the repository level itself. So if you did have a SLA within your environment, I know 7 years is typically the standard. We do have that option, but also we do have quite a granular selection when it comes to those retention policy for 365, whether it be keep forever, or if you wanted to choose a specified number of days, even getting down to that. Once we have selected the time frame for our retention policy, we're going to have two different types of retention to look at. We're going to have our snapshot-based retention, which is going to be that snapshot of your entire environment, and that retention policy will kick in as soon as that snapshot has been taken of that environment. This is, again, as it says here, it is very similar to how the image level backups work if you are using our Veeam Backup and replication environment. Our second option here is going to be our item level retention. Now, the item level retention is going to be as individual objects or items in your environment are modified, edited, or deleted. That is when the retention policy will kick in. So let's say you had a retention policy for 3 years and you had an item that was deleted 3 months ago. So 3 months ago, that 3-year retention policy kicked in. So you will have that deleted item in your environment for those 3 years. For performance reasonings, we are going to recommend that snapshot-based retention as we are just kind of giving an overview in your environment and backing up from that versus that item level. We're getting into those granular backups. Just the backing up the individual items will kind of have a trade-off of a little bit more of data, I'm going to say loss, but overall data usage, as well as just more in your environment to back up versus the snapshot being an overall environment. And we do have our retention policies as well if you wanted to get even more granular into that daily and monthly as well. So you can set that as well just for some more customizability. I will take a pause here if anybody wanted to ask any questions in the chat about our proxies, repositories, and any of the initial setup, including the licensing and organization, before I move on to setting up our initial backup as well as some recovery. So hopping back over here to our initial landing page, and we can see here we do have our backup jobs that have been created in our environment. And we can come down here and I will actually go ahead and add a backup job as if it were our first backup job. So we can see here we will have the option to name and give a description for our backup job that we wish to create. And once we have named the backup job itself, we have two different options for backing up. We're going to have that option to back up the entire organization itself, or we could do a granular, more granular backup itself, and we can add specific objects for our environment. So for these objects, we can get down to adding individual users. We can add preset groups within your Microsoft 365 environment. We can even choose to add SharePoint sites as well as various Microsoft Teams. Or if you wanted to select certain organizations, you could do that as well. For this example, I will just go ahead and add a couple of users to our environment. Just to see, you will have the option of your environment to be loaded here. And I hope somebody in the audience is a Game of Thrones fan, because we can see here that we have lots of Game of Thrones references. So for this example, I have added the following objects that I want to back up in my environment. And just as granularly as I added these items, you can also choose to exclude these items. So in the case of maybe I added a admin grouping, but I have an admin user whose critical backups aren't as critical. So we could choose to add our entire admin grouping, and then we could choose to exclude specific users. So even if you do select to add a group or organization, you're not going to lose any granularity options there. You can just simply choose to exclude those various objects, items, users, sites, teams of that nature. So again, very granular selection objects there. Once we have selected the objects or the environment we would like to back up, we will have the option to select our proxy. As you can see here, my default proxy is chosen. And then from there, we can choose out any object or our repositories themselves that we would like to send our objects to. Now, just to touch back, this backup repository will have the retention settings as well as the type of retention selected with that repository. So once we have selected the objects we wish to back up in our environment, we have then selected our proxy and our repository for the data moving and the landing zone, along with the retention policy for our data, we will be able to select the scheduling here as well. Now, again, back to granularity, we are going to have many granular options when it comes down to the schedule. We have the Run Job Automatically tab, you can see, and you'll have the option to run this job daily at a specific time, even getting down to a periodically, where if we did it every hour, we have the option in here to kind of go in and select when we would like our backups to run or when we'd like to deny backups as well. So again, those very granular options, even getting down here to kind of setting a start time within the hour we would like our backups to begin. Once we have selected the time we would like to back up, another option I would like to point out here is we have this option new is going to be create a backup copy for this job. And we touched on the beginning of this presentation, but this backup copy job can also be immutable. And so if we wanted to create that backup copy job, we can select it there. And if it were going to the applicable landing zones, those S3 environments or those object storage environments, we would have the option to make them immutable. Once we have selected our backup job, we can simply hit create, and we would be able to have our backup job. I already have one in our environment, so I'm just going to lean on the one that I have already set up here, but it would look the same once I have set it up. And it has run its first initial backup job. Once it's run its initial backup job, you're going to get a nice little overview here. So we can see down below we have our status, whether that's the session status, any bottlenecking, and the last backup, the environment. You're also going to get an overview of the data itself, those processing rates, the read rate, and the write rate as well. Last, we'll see here a little summary of the duration objects that have been backed up and the transfer rate of the environment, as well as a nice little action log here where we can see where we are in our backup process. So I walked you through kind of a basic setup for Exchange. I'll also kind of briefly run through a setup for OneDrive as well. And this setup is going to look very similar for SharePoint as well. As you can see here, we are backing up our entire organization itself. And so once again, we are selecting that entire organization. We're not excluding any objects for this OneDrive environment. And then we've selected our environment to back up, which is our entire organization for this example. We will have that backup proxy selection again, and that backup repository with the attached retention policy. And it's of course going to be that landing zone for our backups themselves. And then once again, we are here at our scheduling options with the same scheduling options. I'll take a moment before I move on to our recovery. If there are any questions, feel free to add them in the chat. Great. So for everyone who has just joined us, we are doing our technical deep dive for our Microsoft 365 environment. Just to briefly run you through before we hop into the restore features, just kind of the steps we got here. We have touched on the initial deployment, which was our file that would be downloaded from Veeam or from one of your partners' environments, or potentially AWS or Azure Marketplace. Once we are there, we have selected our licensing here. And once we have installed our licensing that comes with our download package, we will be adding an organization within our environment that can be added up here. Once we have added our organization, which is going to add our Microsoft 365 environment, we are going to add our backup proxies, and where we allocate a host and a port number. And then once we have done our proxy, we will be allocating our backup repository and adding it to our environment. Once we have completed adding the licensing itself after we've deployed the Microsoft Backup for 365 environment for Veeam, and once we've added our organizations, our proxy, and our repositories, we then set up our initial backup job. For those who just joined, we do have a couple backup jobs in this environment. And now we are moving forward to our Explore feature. So our Explore feature itself is going to essentially be mounting that backup. And we are just going to be taking a peek of the backup in that environment. To kind of upload the Explore feature, we are going to select a point in time state where we actually like to look at our backups themselves. We can either choose from our latest point in time state. For us, that would be this morning at 9 a.m., or you'd have the option to do an Explore Exchange point in time state. And this would simply pull up a calendar where you can choose, or you can just kind of choose here from the polling point in time states here. We can go in through your calendar and select when you would like to back up. From there, where you've simply selected that environment, and we are again mounting that backup. Now, one thing you'll note once it does load is this environment will look very similar to yours and your user's environment. As you can see here, it is going to be separated by the users or any archives that we have. And once we are in here, we do have the option, kind of starting from the high level, working down, to restore the mailbox itself back to the original location, whether that be on-prem or in the cloud. We'd also have the option to export these mailboxes to desktop, either as a PST file, and we do have options for exporting various users for MSG files as well. And then, of course, getting down to the individual users, as I mentioned, back to its original host, whether we wanted to restore that to an Exchange on-prem or online, and exporting to that desktop as a PST. Once I'm in the environment, I can kind of select down here and I'll pick on ARIA Start, and we're going to see all the folders just as it is in ARIA's environment. Again, those restore features extend to those individual folders or containers within the Exchange environment, and those same options still apply. But for this example, I'll kind of dig a little deeper and we can kind of go into ARIA's inbox itself. Now, as you should be able to see, our inbox item is loaded for ARIA's environment. And again, it looks just as it did in her Exchange environment. We can get through here and look through these individual email items, even going so far as to open the individual emails themselves. So we can go in and check, and I really want to recover this Salesforce email. Excellent. I can double check that's the Salesforce email I want to recover. And I can come in and I have a couple more options for restoring that I did with the individual users and the overall mailbox and folders. I'm going to have these options to restore ARIA back from which she came back to her host, or restore to the Exchange online, or I'm sorry, on-prem or in the cloud. And then we're going to have those options to export to desktop as either a PST file or save as an MSG file. And one of my favorites down here is we're also going to have the option to simply send this email as an email. Now, this can be sent back to ARIA Start's Exchange if we wanted to send it as an email back to her Exchange, or we could send it as an Exchange message to another user within your environment. I love to use the administrator example. So if you had an admin, maybe potentially leave from your team, and you have another admin coming in to take that position, and you had potentially some email or some items within their environment that you wanted to send to your new admin person. So you'd have the option to just simply send it as an email from your old user that you have backed up to your newest admin in your environment. We also are going to have the option here to compare the item properties if you wanted to get down into the granular functionality. Now, I kind of showed you what it would look like to go through and granularly look at these items, but we are going to have a couple options that can kind of expedite this process. We briefly touched on our e-discovery feature that we are going to have, and this is going to simply be here. We are going to have those items that matches the set criteria that you assign, and we are going to have a lot of customizability when it comes down to this, whether it's category, field name, condition, and then you're also going to be able to set that value to search that environment. Now, let's say that you knew that an item was modified, edited, or deleted from your most recent backup. Now, one thing that's really great we can do, instead of going through and granularly looking through those individual emails as I've done with Aria, we can simply hit this compare with production feature. Now, I don't have any changes in my environment currently, but if I did, what this compare with production feature would be doing would essentially be doing just what it says. It's going to be comparing this snapshot of your environment, this overall backup, with your current production environment. And now if there were any changed items in this environment, it would be able to identify them. And once it's made this comparison, it would actually show changed items only. So again, this is great if you knew you had items that were modified, edited, or deleted. You knew the backup from whence they were still in that environment. You could simply select that backup to pull from, select the compare with production feature, and then select the show changed items only. Now I'll pause for a moment there before we pop over to any Explore features in case anybody has any questions they would like to add in the chat. And I do see in the questions, this will be recorded and it'll be available in our Pro Partner portal for those Veeam users. And I can also see how it can be accessible by the public as well. So thank you for asking. All right, we will go ahead and hop over to our OneDrive Explore features here. And again, these are going to have some of those similar options. So we can choose from that recent point in time state, which I will go ahead and do for this example. Or again, we can go in and look at our most recent backups and choose from the date we would like to look at our backup and recover from. And Edgar, thank you. We appreciate this a very wonderful product. And sorry, Josh, our demo itself looked like it was going to be from about 12:45 to 2. So I do apologize if this started a little earlier on my end. What I can do is I'm happy to kind of run through a brief, let's go ahead and do that before we get into Explore feature. And thank you all for everyone who has been in the environment the entire time. So, and Edgar, we can absolutely touch on that. So I'm going to give you guys a brief run through for where we are right now in this process. So we are looking at our Veeam backup for Microsoft 365 for those of you who have joined, and we have downloaded our installation package. And this is going to include a couple things. It's going to include not only the installation for the Veeam backup for Microsoft 365 environment, but it's also going to include the Explorer features that we will touch on in a bit, and some of us have looked at potentially. It'll have that Exchange downloads. And also in this installation package, you are going to have your licensing information. Now, two different things here to consider is that you could potentially be looking at either that free trial, which of course will come with the licensing and the download, or if you're purchasing it, it will also have the purchase like licensing within that download as well. But once you have downloaded that overall package and we have that licensing, we have installed all the features we need to, we will simply come here to add the licensing itself. Now, as we can see, I do have a license in my environment currently, but we can simply choose here to go in and we will again be looking at that initial deployment file folder. And from there, you will be able to select that licensing that came with the download package itself, and you will add in this environment. It takes a moment of seconds. And once we are here, we have the option to choose to update the licensing manually, or we can choose to update the licensing automatically. Now, another thing we want to look at once we have added the licensing here is we want to add our organization. Now, this organization is going to be connecting that Microsoft 365 environment with our Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 environment, so we can go ahead and begin backing up our environment. Again, we have a couple different services here we can choose from, and you can see they're all going to be selected off the rip. So you're going to have that Microsoft Exchange Online, the SharePoint Online, and OneDrive Business, as well as the Microsoft Teams. We do have the potential to back up specific Teams chats, but we do have some API limitations when it comes to that. So something to consider while setting up the environment itself. And then once we have selected the environment we'd like to back up, we can simply choose the region that we would like to have this connection in, as well as this authentication method we would like to select. So we can either have that modern authentication here or some of the basic authentication. Of course, we are going to recommend modern authentication for overall security purposes. Once we have selected how we would like to sign into our Microsoft 365 environment, we can then choose to either register a new Azure AD application automatically or potentially use an existing Azure AD application. For this example, I'll just run us through setting up a new Azure AD application registration. It's very simple, and Veeam makes it pretty just kind of point and click here. So once we're in here, we are going to choose a certificate type. For this example, I am going to be generating a new self-signed certificate. You do have the option to select a certificate from the store of this server or import a certificate from a PFX file. But just to show you our initial deployment, I will be generating that initial certificate. So it gives us a nice little name here to finish it off. And we can simply go through to our next, where we'll be logging into 365. So I am doing the modern authentication here. So it's simply going to give me a code to copy, and we will be able to go to our Microsoft 365, where we can simply go in and copy and paste that code we were given to sign into our environment. And that's connecting our Microsoft 365 and our Veeam environment. Just so I'm seeing a couple different options here. I'm going to go ahead and touch on these questions I'm getting asked. Can you run the Microsoft Veeam 365 on the same server as VBR server? So for best practices, we are going to recommend these two having their own server, so we can simply back up those environments, or have a separation between those environments in case of a disaster, obviously. And then also, one thing you can do if you are both utilizing the VBR environment and the Veeam Backup for 365 environment is you can actually back up the Microsoft 365 server through the environment to just add that extra layer of security in case anything does happen. But again, Howard, we want to have our own dedicated VBR server. Now, for Veeam connecting to GCC High, I will definitely get back to you on that. I'll have to look in that. And there is a Veeam Microsoft 365 marketplace option. You can find those both in the Azure and AWS marketplaces. So you have a couple options there. Now, just one moment, I'm going to load something else in our environment, and I will be right back. And no problem, Howard. We are now back here, and we kind of did a general run through for those, and sorry for the timing of that. It seems I may have started a little early today, but things we were going to look at once we have downloaded the actual installation package, we have the licensing connected, as well as adding those Microsoft 365 organizations, is taking a look at the backup proxies themselves. And from here, we will just be specifying the host and port. The kind of components for this proxy will be already in the package itself. That's going to be in the Veeam 365 environment. And then once we are there, we can simply choose to connect to our proxy server, and we can have, again, our authentication there that we are going to be using to connect. Again, I did use that modern authentication, and if you wanted to use the legacy login, you have the option there. And that's as simple as that for the proxy. I'll briefly run through the repository itself. And yes, I see a question for, is there a Veeam Microsoft 365 Marketplace Servers Deploy? And there is in both the AWS and Azure marketplaces, just to touch back on that. But we are here in the backup repository environment, and we will run through kind of adding a object storage repository. So once we name our object repository or our storage repository there, we have the two different options. We have the option to back up to object storage, which is going to be those on cloud options, the potential on-prem S3 devices, things of that nature, or you have the option to back up to local disk. Now, once we are there and selected where we'd like our data to land, we have our backup proxy, and we will want to set a local cache path in our environment. That's simply going to store those temporary read writes for the restoration of our data. Once we have selected that proxy in our cache path, we will then be selecting the object storage to send our backups and entering any credentials there. You do have some extra layers of security if we wanted to encrypt that data uploaded to object storage. And from here, we have the retention policy settings. So a notable difference between those who are using the Veeam Backup and Replication environment and those who are using the Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 is we are going to be setting up the retention policy here. And this, of course, is going to have many granular options spanning from 1 year to keep forever, getting down to the specified number of days. Now, once we selected the amount of time we would like to retain our data, we have these two different retention kind of policies or options we choose from. Now, the snapshot-based retention is going to be very similar to an image level kind of backup here, and it's essentially going to take that snapshot of your overall environment. And once the snapshot is taken, that is when the retention policy will kick in. Now, for the item level retention, we're getting more down to a granular retention. That's going to be as each object is modified, edited, or deleted. So let's say you have a 1 year retention policy and you had an object that was deleted from your environment, let's say 3 months ago. You're still going to have that object within your environment from 1 year from its deletion or modification. So that's whenever that retention policy will set in. For overall performance, we do see snapshot-based retention can be the best, as we're not getting into those granular backups and restoration, or I should say granular backups. We can restore as granularly as we'd like with no interference. But that item level is going to just kind of consume a little bit more data and take a little bit more time overall. Getting down to an advanced feature, just to point out here, we are going to have a daily and monthly settings as well, if you so chose for your environment. Now, I just kind of gave a brief overview for that for those who joined at 1, and I'll briefly run through a setting up of a backup job. Thank you all for those who have been with me since the start. But before we do that, I will go ahead and edit a current backup job we have. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to get them in the chat. I'll try to answer them as they come or potentially near the end. So we're going to have here naming of our backup jobs. And we are going to have the objects we want to back up in our environment. So you have two different options. You can either choose to back up the entire organization itself, and you could choose to do that, and we'll talk about exclusions in a moment, but you're gonna have the option to add these objects kind of granularly. What do you want to do it as per user, for groupings, for SharePoint sites, for various Microsoft Teams, or if you had various organizations you wanted to select, you could do that as well. Now, if you did choose to do the entire organization, you would have the option, you're gonna have the option regardless, to exclude those individual users. So the reason I bring up the entire organization, if you wanted to back up your entire organization, but you knew a couple users' data was not that critical, you could come in and simply exclude those users, and you're gonna have those same grouping options, whether it's users, groups, SharePoint sites, or Microsoft Teams as well. And then once we have selected those objects we would like to back up in our environment, we are going to have the selection for the backup proxy, which is going to be our data mover, which is going to be the one we set up. And I see here, Howard, you asked if the proxy server be the M365 server, and those are going to live on the same environment. So yes, whenever you install the components for Microsoft 365, you're going to have that proxy server in the same environment. So yes, those will kind of be one and the same. But once we are here, we've selected that proxy for that data mover that kind of came with our installation there. We're going to have the option to select our repository. That once again is of course going to be the location where we want our data to land, but it's also going to have the retention policy attached to it. Now, once we have selected the objects we'd like to back up, the proxy for our data mover, then we are going to have the option to select our schedule. So we are here, we are choosing to run this job automatically, and we have quite a few options getting down to the daily option or even periodically. Once we get to the periodic, we have the option to come into our little calendar and set when we do not want our environment to be backed up. So you can come in, have permitted times, denied times. So quite a bit of flexibility, even a delay start time if you would like your backups to start within an hour as well. So I'll take a pause for a moment for any questions in the chat before we jump back to our Explore features. Okay, and moving forward, we can do our backup and our Explore for our backups and I'll go ahead and start on Exchange. But as you can see here, and one thing to note is I do have these various Microsoft 365 applications that are going to be separated by application. We do recommend separating these backup jobs by the various applications, as we can see some bottlenecking on the Microsoft end and some performance whenever we're recovering across different organizations. And another thing to note as well is for this environment, kind of a smaller scale or the simple deployment that we've approached here today is going to be for around under, I believe, 5,000 objects within your environment. So another thing to consider, if we had a larger environment, you want to do multiple backups for the various applications, just depending on what your environment looks like. But we have set up our initial backup job, so I will go through our Explore feature. Once again, thank you for those who have been here and seeing this again. Okay, and once we are here in the environment itself, we can see that this environment is going to be granularly loaded. We kind of go over, starting from the high level down to the bottom, we can restore these entire mailboxes, whether back to their Exchange environment. We can also export it to desktop and export to PST files. And also I do see some questions coming in and I will touch on the rest of those near the end as we wrap up, but thank you for keeping those coming. And just as we recovered that overall mailboxes in the environment, we have the option to restore the individual users themselves, either back to their host environment or to an Exchange online or on-prem. You're also going to have the option to export, whether as we have a PST file, and then as we get into more granular options, you'll have the option to export as an MSG file. But I know those PST files can be great for legal requirements. So getting into our inbox here, as you can see, we do have our environment set up just as granularly as these individuals users have in their environment. So we can go through, click on their mailboxes and kind of poke around to make sure, this is the emails that me and the end user want to recover. So I can even go in, take a look at this SharePoint or this Salesforce email here, really need to get it back. So we have a couple different options there. We can restore back to that original environment for ARIA. We can restore it again to that Exchange on-prem or in the cloud. And then we also have these options as we discussed for this export to desktop as a PST and MSG file. And then last is going to be one of my favorite features, which is going to be sending as simply an email, either back to the user or a different user environment. My favorite example is going to be, you have an admin who is leaving the company, a newer admin comes in, and you can, if you had certain emails or inbox items that you wanted to send to your newer admin from your old admin account, as long as you have it backed up, you can make it happen. And also getting into some more features for searching the environment, we are going to have kind of our eDiscovery advanced find feature here where you can specify the various criteria within your environment and specify it to your liking. Quite a few options there, and you'll be able to search the environment that way. Another great feature is going to be our compare with production, and our compare with production is simply doing just that. It's going to be comparing our backup that we are currently looking at with our production environment. So it's comparing, again, the backup that we're looking at with the production. And once it's made those comparisons, if there are any changed items since the most recent backup, we will be able to hit the show changed items only, or from whatever backup you selected, and it'll only show the items that have been modified, edited, or deleted since the backup we are looking at. Lastly, we are going to also have compare item properties if you wanted to look at the item properties for the individual items themselves. Now, I'm going to do a brief overview of OneDrive before I hop in to answer these questions themselves, just to show you it's slightly different, but overall going to be a very simple process here. I am kind of pulling up our environment as it is loaded, and we'll have a couple different features for covering. They are a bit more straightforward, but hey, sometimes straightforward is the easiest. For the OneDrive, we can simply restore the OneDrive to overwrite or keep it. You can copy the OneDrive if you wanted to put it in a different environment, or you could save the OneDrive itself as a file or zip. And then again, my favorite little option here, which is going to be that send it as an exchange mail message, even getting down to the reviewing the properties of the OneDrive itself. And then once we are here, we can kind of go in and look through our environment. And of course, I'll go for my Easter egg, or we can go in, look at our images here, and we can take a peek at this image, our intern lovingly named Snowy, as it is Jon Snow's dog. And we can restore this document, so we can overwrite or keep it. Again, copy the document, save the document as a file or a zip, or send that document through an exchange mail. And again, that option to view properties as well. So again, a very high level overview of those Explore features. I'm going to now pivot back to our question. I see quite a few rolling in and want to make sure that this isn't, these are all touched on. So with the local repository being non-domain join, I will actually have to double check on this, but I do believe that as best practices, right, if we want it to be non-connected to the domain for that extra level of security, absolutely. So I will definitely kind of follow up with that for you, Josh Patterson. And Dan Ortiz, how to separate those jobs. Can you show us the configuration you did? Yeah, we sure can. So for these organizations, I will be able to add, here, 1 minute. So my apologies. We will actually be adding that organization. And when you do that, you'll be having the option to select those services you want to protect in that environment. And this is when we get down to adding those various organizations. So for here, I kind of have it as a 3-in-1. And we can walk through what I have set up in this environment to just double check. So as we can see here, I do have it kind of granularly added by user. What I would recommend is adding individual organizations for each application itself. I think for the overall ease for this demonstration, I just wanted to see how they did it. It would be the individual users, but just to kind of recap on your question, Dan, is we would be adding those various organizations kind of bit by bit. And once we've signed into that, we would just back up the organization as a whole. So then I would add this organization to Exchange Online and then select to back up the entire Exchange Online organization. Or you could get down to what we did in our environment where you can just kind of granularly add individual users. Of course, that's going to depend on the size of your environment, what you would like to do there. And I see there's quite a question here. I'm going to take a moment to read. I see that an end user was having a problem with time zones in their Outlook, asking if it is possible for Veeam for 365 to migrate accounts from one tenant to another. Yes, we do. I have heard of users kind of utilizing that environment, especially from going on-prem to the cloud. There is going to be, I kind of looked into this for another end user, there is going to be a Microsoft kind of offering that can help you kind of migrate that data. It looks like it might be simpler, but yes, you would be able to migrate those accounts from one tenant to another if you so chose. And service providers with multiple customer tenants, what's the best practice for each customer? So the one job for all resources or multiple jobs for each resource. Again, getting down to if you are a service provider, and I hope you are a part of our Veeam service providers groups and our pro partner portal. But recommendation would be to potentially break down those environments for those users and again, separate them by application. This could also depend on how large the end user's environment is. So it does just kind of depend. And last question is, what's the best practice? And then for VCSP, is there an ETA for Veeam 365 REST API and REST Store portal in different servers? So I'm not really sure on the VCSP side. I'm not really sure what REST API because we do have those capabilities for a 365. But to be quite honest, I'm not going to be as well versed in the VCSP. But we can look into that after we get off this call for you. I believe that was Dan, or sorry, Guillermo. So I'm going to keep going through these questions as we get to the top of the hour, half hour. If a user is unlicensed, would this keep a mailbox or would it auto delete? So Joseph, that is a great question. One thing to note is you will have to go through the process of deleting those users once they are unlicensed. Now, I should say, if they are licensed and they leave your company, that's when you're probably going to have to go in through and delete it. But if they are unlicensed and you are trying to back up in the environment, there is going to be kind of a leeway, kind of a side note for the licensing. I believe it's 10 users or 10% of users in your environment. So if you have unlicensed users, you have a little bit of a leeway, but if you do not have the specific licensing for them and they don't fit within that kind of leeway, that 10 users or 10%, we're not going to be able to back up their data. That's kind of the caveat, is we have to be licensed one way or the other, whether in that kind of 10% range, 10 user range, or if they have a associated licensing. So whenever we are exporting to PST, I believe that PST is going to go right to our desktop, and we may have a couple different options. That's a great question, Howard. I will pop back over and check on that. And we'll just show it in our environment here. So we're starting to PST, so it is going to be the option to go directly to the PST file. But you would also have the option, and my environment's being a little sassy right now, but we have the option to export it to the desktop or just choose an individual container within your environment to store that PST document. All right, and hopping over to Luna IT, I see the questions about storage and API costs. It says I would assume that you would have to pay for the data that you would download out of Azure. So that just depends on where your data lives. If you have an on-prem exchange, obviously we're going to kind of bypass any of those storage costs there. Now getting into the deployment in Azure, if you wanted to back up in Azure, of course you are going to see those storage costs. And so far as API costs, the only time we're really going to see that become an issue is going to be for those Teams chats. And I kind of briefly touched on that at the beginning. We do have some limitations when it comes to those Team chats backups, and we are going to see some API costs there. Of course, those are on the Microsoft end. That's not going to be on our end. Right, and moving on, Merrick, sorry about the timing mix up. And it says how to estimate the storage capacity required being discussed. So We do have, I see if you're looking for on-prem, but we are going to have our storage capacity calculator for Veeam for 365, and you should be able to Google that right up and just look up for our Veeam storage calculators. We're going to have that for both 365 and the VBR environments. Now that is more for our cloud solutions, but you could also utilize that to kind of get in a better idea of your on-prem storage as well. And for searching email archives, we are going to have some of those archive backups, and you'd be able to utilize some of those search features that we looked at for e-discovery. And James asks, and I see his exited the meeting, but I'll go ahead and answer it. Are there components for backing up VMs, VMware Windows servers, and Linux servers? So that's going to be more of our Veeam backup and replication environment is where you would look to back up those environments. And I see here there's a question about an overview of difference between the two options of backing up the Teams versus backing up Teams environment. And there's going to be documentation within our help environment, but I do not have any loaded right now. My apologies on that. And I'm just reading through a couple more of these questions, just touching on while I can as we wrap this up. So Jared, your question kind of sticks out to me. I see is there something in the works from automated user management now for extremely large environments? And one thing to note is we are going to have a new software as a solution option here for Veeam, and that's going to be our Serious Backup. Now, just to kind of give a brief overview of our Serious Backup, that's going to be more of a managed solution in the sense of Sirius is going to allocate that storage for you all and work with licensing for your environment. Again, we could always use some more automated user management for just our base 365 backup, and I will absolutely pass that commentary along. But for now, I'll have to look into documentation for that, but I do believe it is more of a manual process. And last question I'll wrap it up with as I am a couple minutes over. It says we were recommended to use Veeam Backup for Microsoft 365 for AWS Marketplace. And you were wondering if you have to keep the server running 24/7, if you can just turn the instance on when you run daily backups. Now, Jacob, that is an incredible question. You can select to have your instance running or your server running only whenever you are using the backups. And we do highly recommend this. Now, if you're able to kind of strategically time your backups for the cloud environment, you can save quite a bit on some of those processing rates, some of the rates that you're going to incur, especially with cloud storage, especially in deploying in cloud storage. We do highly recommend only running that instance whenever you do need to run those backups, preferably outside of regular business hours and things of that nature. Now, thank you all for your time. I am going to wrap it up as I'm a few minutes over. I do see your questions here, and I will try my best to reach out to those of you who I could not get to today. And again, thank you all for your time. We appreciate it. And I hope you all have a wonderful day and enjoyed your technical deep dive with Microsoft 365.